So Fractal Design's Define 7 landed on the review table this week, and I just couldn't help but think, how many of us still need a PC case this large? I mean, don't get me wrong, there is still a market and need for a large EATX system with multiple radiator support, but I really feel that as time goes on, the number of users who can practically make use of all of the volume and radiator mounting and hard drive mounting space in something like the Define 7 is slowly decreasing. We've talked about this briefly in other videos. SLI and crossfire scaling in games are pretty much pointless, leaving gamers with a single GPU, and mainstream socket CPUs today scale all the way up to 16 cores and 32 threads thanks to AMD. So let's talk about this a bit more. We'll of course take a look at what's new with the Define 7 compared to the previous R6, and we'll discuss what sized PC case might be best for you. Now, a lot of you are probably expecting me to say that cases this big are entirely pointless and that you should just buy an NCase M1 and call it a day, but there are a few scenarios where building compact is impractical and actually holding your system back. Granted, those scenarios are becoming less common, and that's kind of the topic of this video. And before we go any further, I just want to address the premise that your system needs to be as compact as possible. That is, your case shouldn't have any extra spare volume inside it, and I just want to make it clear that that is not correct. There is nothing wrong at all with building a standard ATX gaming system in the Define 7. It's just not a very good use of space. But for those who do have a big desk and a big room for your gaming system, and you really don't care how big your PC is, by all means the extra space and expandability room in something like the Define 7 does make sense. But for most of us who are building a gaming or editing system to put on our desk or under our desk, it does make sense to generally build something compact and, just generally a good use of space. So let's take a quick look at Fractal's new Define 7, and I do mean a quick look because there really isn't that much to go over compared to the previous Define R6. Most notably, Fractal Design seems to be undergoing a bit of an identity crisis at the moment, and it might just be me, but I personally think the new Define series cases look a little bit worse aesthetically than the previous one, but let me know your thoughts down below. Along with their rebranding, the cutouts in the power supply shroud are no longer consistent and angular, but now seem a bit more random and messy, and this irregular pattern continues pretty much anywhere throughout the case. Personally, I think this looks a bit dated and is a step backwards. The case has been elevated a bit more now, allowing a bit more breathing room for bottom mounted radiators and power supplies, and they've tried to be a bit more creative with the shape of the feet here. Again, I did prefer the old ones. One positive change is the completely toolless side panel approach now, which uses push pins entirely for being secured, and both the left and right side can be opened via a little tab at the rear. But something that the Define R6 was well known for was the ability to switch between either a storage focused layout or one that was optimized for radiator compatibility, and the Define 7 optimizes this a little bit further. You still get the exact same radiator compatibility in the open layout, up to 420mm up top, 360mm at the front, and 280mm at the bottom, but the compatibility is now improved when using the storage layout. Now a 420mm top mounted rad is supported in both layouts, whereas 360 was the limit previously. And believe it or not, the total number of drives that you can install in the Define case has been increased, up to 7 3.5-inch and 2 2.5-inch drives, but that can be expanded up to a massive 14 3.5-inch and 4 2.5-inch drives. Front I/O has also been nicely updated with USB Type-C. The integrated fan hub gets a tasteful redesign, and you still get the feature-rich Define case as always, with removable dust filters all around, and top panel ventilation is completely up to you. Overall, the new Define 7 is an excellent large mid-tower case, but how many of us can really utilize all of the volume inside this case? I really do feel like it is a minority. And the first point I want to bring up is storage. So obviously this is a very clear focus if you are building in a Define series case. You have a ton of storage space. But my point here is that even a more moderate mid-tower case like the NZXT H510 or Fractal Design Meshify C can fit multiple 3.5-inch and 2.5-inch drives, and with the current density and capacity of storage, I can't help but feel that that's going to cover at least 95% of users. For those who do need more for whatever reason, it's probably more sensible and practical to have your expandable storage on a NAS instead. But of course, there are workflows out there that do demand for a ton of local storage. And for those who might be interested in building something more moderate, like 1 to 4 terabytes of storage, yes, that is considered moderate these days, your best bet there is likely to stick with M.2 and NVMe drives. They're becoming increasingly more affordable, extremely fast, and of course, very space efficient. Most decent ITX motherboards these days do support 2 M.2 slots on board. This is likely a big reason most users are steering towards a mini ITX build. But another reason you might want to build in the Define 7 is the sheer amount of radiator space. I mean, we have up to a 420mm up top, up to a 360 at the front, and up to a 280mm at the bottom. And I guess the question I want to ask here is, how much cooling does your build actually require? And what I mean here is, what is the practical difference between your liquid cooled GPU running at 45 or 50 degrees C compared to, say, 60 or 65 degrees C? Because that really is the minimal thermal difference that you would get by moving from, say, a more conservative liquid-cooled mid-tower case like the NZXT H510 to something a lot larger like the Define 7. Plain and simple, there is diminishing returns in cooling the more radiators that you have. A single 280mm or 360mm loop in a well-ventilated case will get you 90% of the way there. Even the Corsair one, which we reviewed a while ago, has separate 240mm all-in-one coolers for the CPU and GPU, and that proved to be more than enough to keep a 9900K and 2080 Ti system running cool and very quiet. My point being, that system was just 12 liters in volume compared to the 62 liter Define 7. We've also taken a look at how you can build your own custom loop in similar sized cases yourself, but of course that is a lot more difficult to do. One valid reason that you'd probably want to liquid cool in something like the Define 7 instead though is if you're using multiple GPUs or running a loop with a heavily overclocked Threadripper or Xeon W processor. That's where a multi-rad solution is recommended, but of course, the number of you running that sort of configuration is very, very slim. Even with Threadripper workstation builds running stock with the 32 core or 64 core, we've seen how we can cool those chips with a regular off-the-shelf 280mm closed loop cooler. But now let's talk about eATX motherboards, because of course that is a big reason that some of you might choose a case like the Define 7 instead. But again, there are mid-tower cases out there a lot more compact than this one that do support eATX motherboards. Of course, this is one example where mini ITX is not an option, but regular compact mid-towers are still a great choice. But on this train of thought, another reason why you might not want to go with a mini ITX build is due to memory capacity. Although this is improving, some enthusiast ITX boards do support up to 64 gigabytes of RAM across 2 DIMMs. If your workflow requires a lot more, like 128 gigabytes or so, then a mid-tower build that can support ATX and eATX boards is the way to go. So in closing, I think we can all see that the number of us who can fully leverage large volume cases like this is gradually decreasing. 3.5-inch drives are becoming a thing of the past, memory density is increasing, and the amount of performance that you can slot into an ITX motherboard is greater than ever. For gaming focused builds, I really do believe that ITX is the sweet spot. But for those who need more storage, more memory, potential expandability down the road, and maybe even a build around Threadripper, then a compact mid-tower isn't a bad use of space at all. For those using multiple liquid-cooled GPUs, multiple radiators, and an absolute plethora of 3.5-inch drives, there's the Fractal Design Define 7. And just to be clear, I can definitely recommend the Define 7 as a workstation enclosure if that's what you're into, but realistically, most of our systems in this case would be looking lonely and lost. I would love to know your thoughts on this topic down below, and if you're interested in picking up a Define 7 for your new overkill workstation build, I will leave it linked down below. As always guys, a huge thanks for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.